Alright, bro amigos, the Big Mac is back, and you're going to see a lot of 431 in this episode. So yeah, apparently I got 905 quite a bit this past week and a half. Mostly here in Bunnell, but I also caught them up in St. Augustine on the old, actually was left of the old FEC mainline. Remember I talked about it in the last video. If not, I'm going to have a map again to refresh your memory. Or if you didn't watch the previous video, I will enlighten you. But first, I got to run and get my camera before I forget it. Alright, bro amigos, so welcome to FPC number 10. And before we get back to stalking 905 and the awesome GP40-2 number 431, we are going to stalk some ES44 C4s here in Bunnell as they head north towards Jacksonville. So believe it or not, this is actually the same day as that previous clip that I shot in Bunnell. If you remember at the very beginning of that shot, you could see some dark storm clouds moving in. Within, obviously, the 3 hours between that shot and this shot, a huge weather storm moved in and dumped a bunch of rain. Obviously, that was not enough to stop me from stalking 905. And so here we can see 905 had just pushed in the loads into the Vulcan Materials spur. They pulled out the empties, and now they are coming back to the north end of the siding to hook up with the rest of the train to head back north. The cars on the siding on the left were from the other jobs that 905 had worked previous in the morning, and so now they're going to hook those back up and head back north. So the next day I'll catch 905 again here at the southern portion of the Moultrie Cutoff. For those of you who remember from the previous video, the Moultrie Cutoff was a FEC mainline realignment project that occurred back in 1925. The original mainline curved southwest from St. Augustine towards East Palatka before turning back southeast towards Bunnell. We are just about a mile north of Bunnell, and here you can see the siding where 905 is waiting. And while I was waiting for 905 to get the green light to head south, I observed some of the crew members to be looking at a gondola further back on a siding, and that reminded me of some other FEC abandoned history that is in this area, and that is the Lehigh Portland Cement Company Industrial Lead, or I think it was also known as the Lehigh Railroad. So the Lehigh Railroad, or the Lehigh Branch, depending on what you want to call it, was a 6-mile branch line that was built by the Lehigh Portland Cement Company in 1952 in order to help facilitate the logistics operations of its plant to get the cement out onto the FEC's Moultrie mainline cutoff. Remember, at this time, the 1950s was a big booming time for most of America. Remember, World War II had just ended 7 years prior, so you had a bunch of veterans returning home from the war. They wanted to forget about the war. They wanted to move on with their lives. So the country was having an economic boom. You had them cranking out houses, cranking out cars, cranking out babies, and apparently cranking out cement. And so in order to help facilitate some of the operations, the Lehigh Portland Cement Company saw that the Florida market was booming, and so they built the plant. In order to facilitate getting the cement out into the Florida markets, they built the 6-mile rail line and tied it into the FEC. Now, at its peak in 1958, the Lehigh Portland Cement Company in Flagler Beach was generating about 150 cars of cement a day. And so it was busy enough that the FEC actually dedicated a switcher on site for the premises. Now, however, by 1965, the market changed and a destructive labor strike caused the plant to close, along with it, the rail traffic. So the plant and the spur remained abandoned for a while. It remained vacant until about 2003 when the plant was demolished. The rail line was eventually converted into a rails to trails, also known as a Lehigh Greenway Trail. However, you can still see remnants of the spur and the railroad history along the line. There are certain sections where you can still see some of the tracks, and at the east end, right there by Colbert Lane, you can actually still see remnants of the railroad cement switchyard. Now, obviously, these rails have not seen any traffic since 1965, but they're in surprisingly, well, I wouldn't say good shape, but they're in decent shape. And for those of us who are enthusiasts even about abandoned rails, you can still walk and go see where the old switchyard used to be. So here, after about a 25-minute wait, 905 will finally get the green to head south. It will head down to the Harwood siding where it will pick up a cut of cars that have been left there by the new Smyrna Beach local 910. And 905 will bring the cars back up here, grab the rest of its cars at the north end of Dorena siding, and take those cuts back north to Jacksonville. So I'll end up catching 905 a third day in a row. This time he'll be servicing the Vulcan Materials Spur on the south end of Duranda siding. So after setting out the loads and picking up the empties, we'll now see 905 heading back north. So headed home from work late one night, I ended up catching this northbound. I normally don't catch northbounds this time of night, so I filmed it because I thought it was unusual. But this ended up having some of the new Amazon Prime trailer traffic that I believe the FEC just started getting. And from my research, I believe this is either going to be train 208 or 210. So train 107 is a daily southbound Jacksonville to Miami intermodal train. Now on Sundays through Fridays, it will make stops in Fort Lauderdale and drop off any hot piggyback trailers. But on Saturdays, it stops in Fort Pierce and picks up any traffic from Fort Pierce down to Miami. The train just went through Daytona Beach, is now going through Port Orange, and will soon be approaching the new Smyrna Beach Yard. As you can see, it does not let the towns slow it down very much. So while St. Augustine is definitely one of my regular rail fanning spots, it's been a while since I've actually filmed from this spot behind the Ponce Hotel. They have a nice little platform with tables and chairs that you can sit at and kind of wait. Unfortunately, I wasn't paying attention and missed my wide across the river shot that I was hoping for. This guy kind of snuck up on me, and so by the time I noticed him, he was already coming around the bend, which this still is a decent shot because you can still see the locomotives up front and the mid-train coming around the bend. Also, shout out to this train crew. They did give a nice friendly horn wave, as you may want to call it. The FEC crews are usually pretty friendly. I've never had any issues with them, and they are pretty frequently to wave and give little horn shows for you. Remember 905? Yep, found him again. Y'all are about to get real intimate with this crew and number 431. Found him again here on the Wilbert Wright Industrial Lead, which we're going to bring up the Moultrie Cutoff yet again. So this is the northern end of the Moultrie Cutoff, and the cut of cars that you see here, that is 905, is actually sitting on the original FEC main line that went to East Palatka. So here's a map of how the line currently stands. You can see where the current line is, which is the bright red. The maroon is the old lines, the abandoned lines that are no longer there. And so at the very end of the Wilbur Wright Industrial, you will see 84 Lumber, and Titan Block and Concrete is the customers that FEC normally serves. As far as I know, I don't think there's any other customers on this line. And unfortunately for me this day, 905 just completed servicing those customers. So now they are backing their train onto the main line, and they'll head down towards Bunnell, where they'll continue to service other customers, including the Vulcan Materials. So while waiting for 905 to come down towards Bunnell, I would get surprised yet again by another FEC maintenance away truck, and he'd be coming to pick up some of the concrete ties that they had set out earlier. I guess they over distributed these ties, and now they needed to take them for somewhere else. So after watching the claw do its thing for a few minutes, I finally saw the headlight of 905 and its awesome GP40-2 number 431. coming in the distance. So if you're a keen observer, yes, you probably noticed that 905 has gotten quite larger since we last saw it in St. Augustine. So when it came off the Wilbur Wright Industrial Lead, did not have this many cars. So between the time it left St. Augustine and got down here to Bunnell, it serviced some other customers. As you probably noticed, it picked up some gondolas as well as some rock loads. So right now, 905 is going to enter the north end of Durana siding. It's going to set out the empties and park them there while it takes the rock loads down, reverse back up the main line, and it's going to service the Vulcan materials. It's going to pull out the empties, put in the loads, and then it'll take the empties from Vulcan, hook back up the rest of this consist, and head back north to Jacksonville. So unfortunately, due to having the time constraints of having a full-time job, I had to stop filming here and go get ready for work. However, Vulcan Materials is probably one of the most frequent customers that 905 services on this line. So if it's not serviced every day, it's almost every other day. So if you ever want to see 905 switching the Vulcan, it's a pretty consistent, reliable event. Alright guys, that'll do it for this video. I know this was 905 intensive this time. That just happened to be the luck of the draw. Hopefully you like GP40s and locals. If not, well, it is what it is. Also, other FEC guys, if you know where 430 is, the veterans unit, please send it my way. I haven't seen it in a couple months, and I got a fever. And I need a veterans unit.